Good morning. Why don't we take a look at early Renaissance sculpture today? The first half of the 15th century in sculpture sees domination by the work of two men, Ghiberti and, most importantly, Donatello. Now, as with other artists of the time, Ghiberti wore the mantle of Renaissance man well. When we say Renaissance man, we're speaking of someone who is able to do a lot of things exceptionally well. And in considering the work of both Ghiberti and Brunelleschi, we can understand that use of that term to this very day, describing again a person of many skills. Now, Brunelleschi has already been identified as the most important architect and goldsmith of some repute, in addition to the sculptor that we're going to look at now. Ghiberti, the sculptor, also did significant work in architecture. Now we compare two competition panels, one from Ghiberti that we see at the bottom, and the top one by Brunelleschi. Now Gardner, in the textbook, makes the assertion that Ghiberti's work on the bottom is not as daring in its composition as Brunelleschi's work. And the fact that the figures don't relate as well to the format in Ghiberti's piece as they do in Brunelleschi's certainly makes that seem to be a somewhat valid point. However, Brunelleschi's work is sometimes suggested to be overly busy. Now, the overall cohesiveness of Ghiberti's work validates that assertion, and it's seen as one closely knit image by the background, as opposed to several separated images that we see in Brunelleschi's work at the top. Now, 7 artists were chosen to compete for this commission, including Donatello and Della Quercia, who are included in your textbook. Now, each of the artists in this competition were paid a salary for 1 year to work on their piece to be submitted. Some small controversy at least was raised over Ghiberti's win, in particular by Brunelleschi's biographer. While Ghiberti described his victory as the result of his competitors recognizing the superiority of his work and conceding, there probably were at least 7 sides to this story and 6 bruised egos. Now, several changes have taken place in Ghiberti's work by the time he received the commission for this final set of doors, the completed east doors for the Florentine baptistry in 1425. These doors are often called the Gates of Paradise and differ significantly from his earlier north doors. When we compare the east doors with the north doors, we see several differences. One, the elimination of the Gothic quatrefoils. Look at the overall shape of each motif, each sculptural relief area. There's also a significant reduction in the number of scenes. We've got 28 on the right and a mere 10 on the left. And then maybe most importantly in a sculptural context, the consistent bronze background has been eliminated in the east doors. Now, in comparing these details, you can see the significance of the third point. Relief sculpture, since the time of the Egyptians, had been conceived of as figures emerging from or placed on a level plaque. Now, while he wasn't the first artist to do so, Donatello preceded him in this respect. Ghiberti conceived of all of the relief panel as being equally important areas to be used to suggest space. Now, Ghiberti revolutionizes relief sculpture in much the same way that Giotto revolutionized painting in liberating figures from flat ground planes. Ghiberti's liberation of his own work as an older man, in his late 40s when receiving the commission — I can't believe I said that was an older man — should not be surprising when considering the revolutions in thought that he was witnessing at the time. Both Donatello's work and Brunelleschi's, then Alberti's, their theories of placing figures in space with the new system of perspective, influenced this sculptor greatly. In considering Ghiberti's work in the textbook, we might think of him as a sculptor who worked only in relief, and that's not so. This bronze of St. John the Baptist, standing over 8 feet 4 inches tall, showed that Ghiberti had a remarkable skill at executing freestanding sculptures, and this sculpture was done in between his 2 sets of doors time-wise. The powerful and expressive countenance of St. John is really tremendous in this piece, as you see in the detail on the right-hand side of the screen. And now enters Donatello. Donatello was born Donato Bardi, and he was first encountered in documents as an assistant to Ghiberti. He was born in 1386, so he would have only been 15 years of age at the time of the competition, and that seems to contradict Vasari's claim that he was one of the competitors for the commission of the baptistry doors in Florence. Undoubtedly, his association was that of an assistant. It was not long, however, before he broke out on his own, and in many ways eclipsed the work of his employer. Donatello's first major works were for Or San Michele, and Donatello's love for and familiarity with classical sculpture are readily apparent in his marble statue of St. George that we see here. Remember, Donatello traveled to Rome with Brunelleschi to study classical art and architecture. Donatello revived the principle of weight shift of the Greeks, giving motion and liveliness to his figures, and this may even be better seen in his sculpture of St. Mark. Now, Donatello also twists the torso, resulting in a more natural figure, and this is a major aspect of the new realism of the Renaissance. Donatello also sought to revive the Greek notion of ideal beauty. Now, to further understand the enormous strides taken by Donatello, contrast his work with the jam statues from Chartres Cathedral seen in your textbook. Done some 200 years earlier, the jam statues are much stiffer and far less lively, typical of Gothic sculpture. Donatello's work is a major jump forward, or perhaps backwards, when you consider the Greeks. This is Donatello's prophet Zucconi, thought to represent Jeremiah, and this shows a growing and very different side to this sculptor. Old Pumpkinhead, as he's sometimes called, is a figure of great intensity, far surpassing Donatello's previous efforts. This terrifying figure draws his chin in, symbolically gazing down on the streets bitterly, and the palaces of Israel fall under his gaze as well. And he opens his mouth in condemnation and proclaims a rule of righteousness and peace. Note also in this piece that it's nowhere near as finished in terms of representing beauty as the piece of St. George that we just looked at was. Much more brutal in terms of its sculptural approach. In particular, the figure's drapery, like the head, is composed of those few brutal strokes, almost appearing unfinished, but doubtless terrifying to an observer who would have been 30 feet below. Donatello used his optical knowledge to calculate the effect of distance on the viewing of his work, and his skill in this area was more respected even in his time than the finish of some of his contemporaries' works. This is the Feast of Herod, and this relief sculpture is significant for a number of reasons. It shows Donatello's strength at grouping a number of figures. It's also based on the true linear perspective of Brunelleschi, which created a rational basis for the suggestion of space. And as discussed with Ghiberti's work previously, It shows the break from flat background planes that characterized all previous relief sculpture. Now we know where Donatello's David comes from, classical antiquity, yet we're still not quite prepared for it. While artists such as Andrea Pisano represented sculptors in their work carving male nudes, this was the first freestanding nude figure since antiquity. Now, this soft, rather effeminate boy, in many ways thought to represent the young Jesus, is a luscious romantic figure untroubled by the severed head lying at his feet. Now, the nature of the figure, also thought to reveal aspects of Donatello's personality, is eclipsed only by the majesty of the pose and its execution. The weight shift principle is fully deployed, and of particular interest is the almost abstract character of the arms and hands. I find the arm and hand on the left side to be just incredibly striking. Now, Donatello has created a work of epic significance for all artists in all times, which far improves on his earlier representation of the subject. Here then is Donatello's earlier representation of David, and I think it's very important to recognize the lesser works of artists. Our book, and many others, too often fail by only seeking to be greatest hits anthologies, which not only do us a disservice in appreciating artists' works, but also does the artists a disservice in discrediting the preparatory work that they had to go through to create their masterworks. Donatello, like Ghiberti, did not rest on his laurels in his later years. Around 20 years after his triumph with his later David, Donatello found himself occupied with two works which would become his signature pieces. That first signature piece is Donatello's Gattamelata, and Gattamelata is an equestrian statue of Erasmo da Nani. It was obviously based on the Roman statue of Marcus Aurelius that was done nearly 1,300 years earlier. The statue of Marcus Aurelius was saved from recycling, not a new concept, done so much with ancient bronze sculpture, only because it had been misidentified as a portrait of Constantine, the first Christian emperor. Now, while perhaps not as animated, Gattamelata exceeds the previous work in terms of its majesty. Large, simple shapes dominate the work. The general's baton and sword form a sweeping diagonal which ties the work together neatly. Now, as Donatello had never seen Gattamelata, he made no attempt to capture his likeness, and he focused his energies on representing an ideal of a general in the prime of his life. In many ways, this head bears a great resemblance to Roman portrait heads, in keeping with Donatello's other sources. The other major late work of Donatello's career is that of Mary Magdalene. It was notable technique-wise in that it was made of wood and was once painted and gilded. Donatello sought with this work to reject the body as the imperfect carrier of the soul. This haggard figure emerges from her long sojourn in the desert to reveal a new and old Donatello at the height of his powers. Contrasting Mary Magdalene with Gattamelata makes the powerfully expressive nature of Mary Magdalene even clearer. In the artist, we get the sense of the old man identifying more with Mary Magdalene. He's no longer concerned with his reputation, almost feisty. Here it is. If you don't like it, tough. Donatello almost anticipates German expressionism of the 20th century with this magnificent, if harrowing, figure. So not only was Donatello a Renaissance man in terms of his different interests, He was a Renaissance man in terms of his ability to create sculptures of remarkable variety. As we go now to the second half of the 15th century in our study of sculpture, we'll see aspects of the art of Donatello combined with the theories of Alberti. And these aspects will be utilized by a number of sculptors of the second half of the Quattrocento to further glorify the ancient arts in updated versions. We'll start with Bernardo Rossellino. He was a student of Alberti's, and he was typical in that he too was both a sculptor and an architect. Now, as in antiquity, pagan concerns and values were top concerns of Renaissance humanists. Bernardo designed this tomb for Leonardo Bruni, the great humanist scholar, Vatican's secretary, and Florentine councilman. Now, while Bernardo was nowhere near the equal of the great sculptural masters, the Bruni tomb established the standard type of Florentine wall tomb that would be used by both his younger brother Antonio and Desiderio di Sattignano. We see now the work of Antonio Rossellino, and Antonio collaborated with his brother on many projects and is best known for his portrait busts, which are similar to Roman portrait busts from some 1500 years earlier. This portrait bust of Giovanni Cellini is stern and unflattering. Also, it's his first signed work. Not immediately obvious in this piece is why the Rossellino brothers were associated with the sweet style. A close associate of the Rossellino brothers was Desiderio di Settignano. Together, their work formed the backbone, if there is any, of the sweet style that was popular during the middle years of the Quattrocento. Settignano is considered the greatest sculptor of children in history, and he made a specialty of luminosity in marble. And while he was indeed limited in the emotions that he could or would convey, he remains the very symbol of elegance, refinement, and grace in mid-century Florence. Now, Andrea del Verrocchio was the most important sculptor of the second half of the 15th century. His work dealt with issues of substance, unlike his contemporaries that we've just looked at, and he is immensely important for the students his workshop attracted, among them Perugino, and most notably, Leonardo da Vinci. Now, while Verrocchio's David differs from Donatello's in mood, dress, and pose, he nonetheless understood the principles of classical sculpture and put them to use in a work of significant historical importance as contrasted with the themes of his contemporaries. Verrocchio's last work was his greatest. Created for a competition with two other masters, Verrocchio died the day before his completed clay model could be cast in bronze. While a similar motif to that of Donatello's Gattamelata, Verrocchio's work is of an essentially different character here. No longer is the equestrian monument conceived of in static terms, as Verrocchio depicts the actual general riding into battle. A heroic contrast of poise and fury animate this work, which is one of the greatest sculptural depictions concerned with a moment of drama. Its very contradiction of the media is the reason for its success. Now we see the work of Antonio Pollaiuolo, and Pollaiuolo was a sculptor, painter, and a goldsmith. As a sculptor, he is closely related to Verrocchio, and this sculpture of Hercules and Antaeus shows his familiarity with small bronze figures on ancient sarcophagi. As a work done in the round, it was carefully conceived of to be seen from all sides and remain in balance on a central axis as it was turned. It's unusual for its size. It's but 18 inches tall, after all the heroic and enormous work that we've seen from this period in art history. And this concludes our look at early Renaissance sculpture.